Dear listeners, we're back with a new story. Get ready for cheating, revenge, and wild relationship drama. I sat in the airport lounge, watching people rush past me like leaves caught in a storm. The distant sound of announcements blurred into a dull hum, a fitting backdrop to my thoughts. This was my life now, another trip, another round of handshakes and presentations. I'd grown accustomed to it, but every time I packed my suitcase, I felt the weight of my absence pressing down on my chest. As I flipped through my notes, a deep ache settled in my gut. Back home, Sarah was slipping away from me, like sand through my fingers. The signs had been there, subtle at first. Her laughter had become infrequent, our late-night talks dwindled to whispers, and our shared moments felt like echoes of what once was. I could no longer shake the feeling that with every mile I traveled, I was losing her a little more. David, a voice jolted me from my thoughts. I looked up to see my colleague, Mark, approaching with a wide grin. Ready to seal the deal in Chicago? Yeah, sure, I replied, forcing a smile. Just trying to mentally prepare myself, Mark chuckled. You need to stop overthinking it. You're the best presenter they've got. I nodded but couldn't shake the feeling of dread creeping in. Thanks, Mark. I'll try to keep that in mind. He clapped me on the back, still smiling, and headed off to the bar. I watched him go, wishing I could share his carefree attitude. Instead, I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my messages. No new texts from Sarah. I felt that familiar knot in my stomach tighten. I had promised myself I would call her before the meeting, to hear her voice, to remind her that I was thinking about her. But just as I was about to dial, I caught a glimpse of Olivia across the lounge. She was striking, confident, with an infectious smile that lit up her face. We locked eyes for a brief moment, and my heart skipped. I quickly looked away, guilt washing over me. I was a married man, after all. Hey, David. Is that Olivia from marketing? Mark's voice broke through again, and I turned to see him motioning her over. My stomach twisted as I fought the urge to get up and leave. I couldn't let myself be drawn into this. Yeah, it looks like it, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Olivia approached, her presence warm and inviting. David. I didn't know you were here. How's the trip treating you? Just getting started, I replied, forcing a smile as I felt the tension in my chest. Same old, same old. Are you staying out of trouble? She teased, her eyes sparkling. Always, I chuckled, but inside, I felt the weight of my responsibilities pressing down. I needed to be better, to show Sarah that she could trust me. My mind raced with the implications of even the smallest flirtation. I should probably get ready for the meeting, I said, breaking away from the conversation before it could deepen. Olivia nodded, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. All right, but we should catch up later. I'd love to hear more about your project. Sure, maybe after the conference, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. As I made my way to the restroom, I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection. What was I doing? I was betraying not just Sarah but myself. The guilt was a thick fog, clouding my judgment. I needed to remind myself of my responsibilities, of the family waiting for me back home. With resolve, I walked back into the lounge, determined to focus on the upcoming presentation. I spotted Mark chatting with Olivia, and I turned away, shaking my head. I chose to leave before things could spiral out of control. But as I walked toward my gate, I couldn't help but feel the sting of regret for what I was leaving behind, a relationship teetering on the edge of collapse. Would I ever be able to bridge this growing distance with Sarah? As I took my seat on the plane, the weight of uncertainty settled in, and I hoped that somehow, I would find my way back to her before it was too late. The conference stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Each day blended into the next, filled with slideshows and networking events, and by the end of it, I felt like a ghost drifting through the halls of the hotel. The bustling energy around me was electric, yet I felt increasingly detached, burdened by the guilt that shadowed my every interaction. The night I decided to hit the hotel bar after a long day of meetings, I hoped a drink would help dissolve the knot in my stomach. As I settled onto a stool, I scanned the room, looking for a distraction. That's when I spotted Olivia again, her laughter ringing through the air like music. She was surrounded by colleagues, but there was an undeniable pull drawing me toward her. "Hey, David," she called, her smile bright as she waved me over. My heart raced at the attention, an intoxicating mix of desire and dread flooding my senses. "Mind if I join?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I approached. "Not at all. I was just telling them how you've been the star of the show," she teased, her eyes sparkling. I couldn't help but grin at the compliment, but it felt hollow, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. "Yeah, well, I'm just trying to keep up," I replied, attempting to deflect the praise. As the conversation flowed, I found myself drawn to her energy, the way she spoke with passion about her work. For a moment, it felt good to escape the weight of my reality. Later that night, after most of our group had left, Olivia leaned in closer, her voice softening. "You know, it's really nice to talk to someone who understands the challenges we face in this industry. I feel like most people just don't get it." I nodded, feeling the electric current between us. "It can be tough. Sometimes I feel like I'm missing out on everything at home while I'm out here." "Do you ever wish you could just escape it all?" she asked, her gaze locked onto mine, and I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "Yeah, sometimes," I admitted, fighting the urge to lean in closer. "But I have a family to think about. My kids need me." Her expression shifted, and I felt the tension hang in the air. "And your wife? Does she ever come with you?" "No, Sarah doesn't travel much," I said, shaking my head. "She has her hands full with the kids and everything at home." "Must be tough," Olivia said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Being away from your family, I mean. It can really take a toll." Just then, the bartender arrived with another round of drinks, breaking the tension. I forced myself to focus on the glass in front of me. The alcohol had started to dull my senses, but guilt gnawed at me with every word exchanged. "Hey, let's get a photo," Olivia suggested, raising her phone. "This will be one for the books." "Sure," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. We posed together, and as she pressed her body close to mine, I could feel the spark. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I could almost hear Sarah's voice echoing in my mind, a reminder of the promise I had made to her. "Thanks for the distraction," I said, trying to lighten the mood as we broke apart. "I really needed it tonight." "Anytime," she replied, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Just remember, you're a great catch, David. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the evening wound down, I made an excuse to leave, the internal battle raging within me. I returned to my room, but sleep eluded me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night in my mind, tormented by the choices I faced. The next morning, I found myself in the conference room, surrounded by colleagues. But all I could think about was the look in Olivia's eyes and the flutter of excitement it brought. The guilt was a constant weight on my chest, reminding me that I was betraying not just Sarah, but the love we had built over the years. At lunch, I spotted Mark and joined him at the table, desperate to push the thoughts of Olivia away. "How's everything at home?" he asked, digging into his sandwich. "Busy, as usual," I said, forcing a smile. "You know how it is." "Yeah, I can imagine." "Have you talked to Sarah lately?" he asked, glancing at me knowingly. "Not much," I admitted, guilt washing over me again. "I should really call her later." "You should. Communication is key, man," Mark advised, and his words hung heavy in the air. As the days dragged on, the temptation to reach out to Olivia grew stronger. Every time I saw her, the thrill was palpable, but so was the guilt. I struggled to focus on my work, the shadows of my conscience looming large. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, and I knew I had to be careful. That night, I found myself back at the bar, and this time, I had no excuse to leave. Olivia was sitting alone, and as I approached, I could feel the weight of my choices pressing down on me. "Hey, I thought you weren't coming," she said, her smile disarming. I couldn't stay away, I confessed, feeling the allure of her presence. "Good, because I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, leaning closer, and the world around us faded. I could feel the tension rising again, the sweet allure of temptation dancing dangerously close to my resolve. But deep down, I knew I had to make a choice, and with every word exchanged, I was stepping closer to a precipice. Would I fall, or could I find my way back to the life I had promised to cherish? The flight home felt interminable, each minute stretching into eternity as I replayed the events of the past week in my mind. The thrill of my interactions with Olivia battled against the heavy guilt that loomed over me. I was acutely aware of the impending confrontation with Sarah, and the closer we got to home, the more my stomach twisted in knots. As I finally stepped through the front door, I was met by an unsettling silence that wrapped around me like a shroud. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. The house felt different, charged with an unsettling energy. I dropped my suitcase by the door and made my way toward the living room, only to find Emily and Chris sitting side by side on the couch, their faces drawn and serious. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. "Hey, kids. How was your week?" I asked, forcing a smile despite the anxiety building within me. Chris looked up, his eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place. "Dad, we need to talk," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Yeah, it's important," Emily added, biting her lip as she exchanged a glance with her brother. I knelt down in front of them, sensing the gravity of their expressions. "What's wrong?" "You can tell me anything." "Mom, she's been seeing someone else," Chris blurted out, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the ground shift beneath me, my mind racing as I processed what I had just heard. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions flooding in. "I saw her with a man, someone we don't know." "They were together last weekend," Emily said, tears welling in her eyes. "We didn't know how to tell you." My heart raced as disbelief morphed into anger and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Where is she now?" "She's upstairs." "I think she's with him," Chris said, looking down at his hands as if they were suddenly more interesting than the conversation at hand. I stood up abruptly, adrenaline pumping through my veins. "Stay here. I need to talk to her." I stormed upstairs, each step fueled by a mix of betrayal and fear. I kicked open the bedroom door without knocking, my heart pounding as I confronted the scene before me. Sarah, her back turned to me, was standing by the window, her voice raised in an argument with a man I didn't recognize. "Sarah!" I shouted, and she spun around, her eyes wide with shock. "David! You're back early," she exclaimed, her panic evident. "Early? That's all you have to say?" I snapped, my anger bubbling over. "What the hell is going on here?" Before Sarah could respond, the man, tall and athletic, stepped forward. "Look, man, this isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I shot back, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Because it looks like you're sneaking around with my wife." "David, please, just let me explain," Sarah said, her voice rising in desperation. "This isn't what you think." But just as she reached for me, the fire alarm blared, the piercing sound cutting through the tension. A thick, acrid smoke began to seep into the room, and my heart dropped. "Is that smoke?" Chris's voice echoed in my mind as I suddenly recalled the faint smell that had crept into the house. My instinct kicked in. "Get out! Everyone, out!" I shouted, pushing past Sarah and the intruder as the reality of the situation set in. Chaos erupted as I rushed down the stairs, yelling for the kids. I grabbed Emily and Chris, their faces etched with fear. "We need to go, now," I yelled, shoving them toward the front door. But Sarah lingered at the top of the stairs, her expression torn. "David, I can't just leave him here," she called, panic in her voice. Are you kidding me? I shouted back, frustration boiling over. Your lover is not worth our lives. As I pulled the kids outside, I could see the neighbors gathering across the street, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. The sound of sirens began to fill the air, but all I could think about was getting my family to safety. Dad! The fire is getting worse. Chris yelled, pointing toward the billowing smoke that was now filling the living room. Mom! Emily screamed, glancing back at the house. We can't leave her, stay put. I ordered, my voice firm but laced with fear. I rushed back to the house, adrenaline surging through me. I couldn't leave Sarah behind, no matter how angry I was. I charged up the stairs, the smoke thickening around me. I burst into the bedroom, finding Sarah still at the window, her lover attempting to find an escape route. We need to get out. I shouted, my voice barely audible over the roar of the flames creeping closer. David, Sarah began, but I cut her off. No time for excuses. Grab your things and let's go. I barked, my heart racing. In that moment, the gravity of our situation hit me. As she scrambled for her things, I turned to the other man. You're coming with us, I said, my voice low and menacing. He hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes, but as the smoke billowed in, he nodded, following us toward the door. Together, we stumbled down the stairs, the heat becoming unbearable. As we burst through the front door, I caught sight of the neighbors, wide-eyed and whispering, their curiosity tinged with horror. David! Is everyone okay? Mark's voice cut through the chaos as he rushed to us, his face pale. Not yet. I shouted, trying to lead my family away from the house, but I couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation and betrayal that hung in the air. Just then, Sarah stumbled outside, dragging the other man behind her. The sight of him made my blood boil, but I couldn't focus on that now. Get away from him! I yelled, my voice breaking as I pointed toward the chaos behind us. David, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face as she turned to me, desperate for understanding. But the neighbors were already whispering, their eyes wide with shock as they pieced together what had happened. I felt exposed, stripped of the facade I had tried so hard to maintain. As the fire department arrived, I could see the flames dancing in the windows, consuming everything in their path. The chaos that had erupted in our home felt surreal, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I looked at my kids, their faces filled with fear, and my heart sank. This was not how it was supposed to be. The fire may have been extinguished, but the embers of our shattered trust would take much longer to cool, and I wondered if we could ever find our way back from this chaos. The sirens faded into the distance as the firefighters doused the last embers of our home, leaving behind a scene of devastation that mirrored the chaos inside my heart. I stood with Emily and Chris on the sidewalk, my mind racing as I tried to process the whirlwind of events. Sarah was speaking to a firefighter, her voice shaky, while the other man stood awkwardly to the side, looking as lost as I felt. Dad, is Mom going to be okay? Emily asked, her small hand clutching mine tightly. I could see the worry etched on her face, and it tore at my heart. I don't know, honey, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. But we'll figure it out together. Why was she with him? Chris asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the hurt evident in his eyes. I glanced back at Sarah, who was now standing alone, her gaze lost in the distance. I don't know, I admitted, feeling the weight of my own failures crashing down on me. But we need to stay strong right now, okay? Before Chris could respond, Sarah approached us, her eyes red and puffy from crying. David, she started, her voice shaky. I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to find out like this. Then how did you want me to find out? I shot back, frustration bubbling to the surface. You could have told me. We could have worked through this. David, please, just listen to me, she pleaded, desperation lacing her tone. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was feeling so alone while you were away, and then, it just happened. Feeling alone? I echoed, my voice rising. You think I don't feel alone, too? I've been gone half the time. You knew this was going to be hard for both of us. Emily stepped forward, her eyes darting between us. Mom, why didn't you just talk to Dad? You could have told him how you felt. Sarah looked at her, tears spilling down her cheeks. I thought I could handle it. I thought it was just a phase. But then I got swept away. I never meant for you two to find out this way. And now look where we are, I interjected, my anger boiling beneath the surface. Our house is gone, Sarah. Everything is ruined. What were you thinking, David? She said softly, her voice breaking. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I need you to believe that I love you. I want to make this right, do you? I challenged, my heart racing. Because it feels like you've chosen someone else over our family. I didn't choose him, she exclaimed, her voice rising in anguish. It was a moment of weakness, a stupid mistake. I'm here now, and I want to fix this. Please, just give me a chance. I was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. What about our kids, Sarah? What example are we setting for them? Do you think they're not affected by this? Chris, who had been quiet until now, looked at Sarah, his voice trembling. Do you love him? No, she cried, her eyes wide with panic. I love you both. You're my family. I don't want to lose any of you, but you were willing to risk everything for a fling, I said, the hurt pouring out of me. What does that say about our marriage? Before she could respond, the sound of a crackling radio interrupted us. A firefighter approached, looking serious. I'm sorry, but the situation with the fire is under control. However, you need to be aware that your house suffered significant damage. It's unsafe to enter right now. What does that mean? I asked, my voice rising again. Where are we supposed to go? I can help with accommodations, he said, offering a sympathetic smile. We have resources for families displaced by fires. We'll make sure you have a place to stay tonight. Tonight? I echoed, my heart sinking further. We just lost our home, and now we have to sleep somewhere else. Dad, I'm scared, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos around us. I wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. I know, sweetheart. We'll figure this out together. We have each other, and that's what matters most. As we stood there, surrounded by firefighters and concerned neighbors, I felt a mix of anger and despair swirling within me. I could see Sarah out of the corner of my eye, her figure small and defeated. Despite everything, there was a part of me that wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I was afraid of what that would mean for us. Let's just go, I finally said, my voice heavy with resignation. We'll deal with this later. Right now, we need to focus on the kids. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I understand. I'll follow your lead. As we turned to leave, the weight of uncertainty loomed over us. The fire may have extinguished the flames consuming our home, but the fire within me was far from extinguished. As we drove to the emergency shelter, the silence in the car was deafening. I could feel the tension thickening between Sarah and me, like a live wire waiting to spark. The kids sat in the back, their faces pale, the reality of our situation settling in. Dad, what are we going to do? Chris finally broke the silence, his voice trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to summon strength. We'll find a way through this. We'll talk about everything when we're settled. For now, let's focus on making sure you both feel safe. I don't want to stay in some random place, Emily said, her voice small. I want to go home. I know, sweetie, I replied, my heart breaking for them. But right now, home is where we make it. And we will figure it out together. As we arrived at the shelter, I could see other families gathered, their faces mirroring our own uncertainty. The realization that we were not alone in our struggles offered a sliver of comfort, but it did little to quell the storm inside me. I turned to Sarah, my expression serious. We need to talk about what happens next. This can't just be swept under the rug. I know, she replied softly, her gaze downcast. I want to make things right, David. I want to fight for us. Then let's start fighting, I said, determination rising within me. We can't let this fire define who we are. We need to face this head-on. As we stepped into the shelter, I felt the weight of our choices bearing down on us, but I also felt the flicker of hope amidst the chaos. We would have to confront the fire within, and as painful as it would be, perhaps it was the only way to rebuild what had been lost.